Bruce Aflan munnamateeka wa Kyagulanyi Ssentamu Robert Bobi Wine omuzungu ali international yakulemberamu omusango Bobi Wine gwe yatwala mu kkooti y'ensi yonna ICC mwawaabirira General Kaguta Museveni mutabani we n'abalala 24 olwaleero gwe tuli naye otwogere ku nsonga ez'enjawulo ezigenda mu maaso mu ggwanga lya Uganda n'omusango guno gwennyini gwe baatwala mu kkooti y'ensi yonna mu baweera obujulizi abantu 215 era kkooti y'ensi yonna neegukkiriza nti Mwami Museveni alina ebyokuddamu era nti bagenda kumuyita abitebye era bw'omusango gunaamukka mu vvi ate bamuwe ekibonerezo. Ate nno waliwo ebbaluwa eyayisiddwa Mwami Museveni ne poliisi ye wano e Uganda nga bawera entambula za Kyagulanyi Ssentamu Robert Bobi Wine okuddamu kutalaga ggwanga Uganda era nga etteeka lye basigamyeko lyawandukulwa dda kuba lyagaanibwa oba lyawerebwa kkooti ya ssemateeka kati ate Mwami Museveni mwe yasinzidde okugaana Kyagulanyi Ssentamu okuddamu okukuba enkuŋŋaano oba okuddamu okutambula mu bannayuganda. Twagala twogereko ne munnamateeka ono Bruce Aflan owa Kyagulanyi wali international okusinziira mu ggwanga lya America ate nga yakulemberamu okutwala omusango ogwo mu ICC atugambe kino kitegeeza ki era ki ekirina okukolebwa nga bannayuganda ffenna okulaba nga Mwami Museveni obukulembeze bwe butuuka ku nkomerero. Jjukira ono ye yawa Kyagulanyi Ssentamu Robert amagezi n'amugamba n'amukaka nti ssebo genda otambule Uganda yonna ogyetooloola okuva ku nsonda paka ku nsonda tulabe Mwami Museveni amaanyi ge weegali tulabe ky'anaakola. Bw'anaagezaako okugamba nti akuba abantu abatambula abalemese abatte ffe twagala bujulizi nga twongera okutwala mu kkooti y'ensi yonna. Bw'anaagaana okubakuba abantu n'atya okubakuba olw'obutawaayo obujulizi bulala mu kkooti y'ensi yonna nga tuyingira State House nga atakola tondeka nyuma. Yawa option 2 Kyagulanyi nti ezo ze ziriwo wakati wa Mwami Museveni ne bannayuganda. Mwami Museveni zonna kyakola kimufulumya ofiisi n'asigala nga takyagituddemu. Kati twagala twogere ku nsonga ezo tunnyonnyola deeply ki ekiddako omukulembeze banakumayo mu ggwanga Uganda agende mu maaso n'okutambula oba agondere ekyo Mwami Museveni kye yamutaddeko mbw'ayagala kuttisa bantu Kale tulabe munnamateeka ono yabituviire ku ntono era ebigambo abitugambe bulungi mutuule wansi mukkalire tuwulirize emboozi.
Yes, well, as you know, JB, we filed the case in the summer and the court acknowledged receiving our materials. We submitted 215 affidavits from witnesses who have said they saw or they were a part of torture in the various detention centers. Mostly up. So we have hundreds of people who have testified in the Special Forces Command as to the torture that they have experienced. And this is unusual because usually one brings a case to these forums asking for investigation, but we're now coming to them with more than 200 witnesses, many of whom detail very graphic and brutal acts by the Special Forces Command and other people in the government. And we even have 4 people who testify that they themselves were confronted with Muhoozi, the general's son, at these torture centers, and he was in command and was fully aware of what they went through and was commanding these detention centers. So we have witnesses who said Muhoozi has the person running these torture centers, and we have over 200 people who explain how they were brutalized. So we have a very strong case we've made for the ICC. Now they have to decide whether they take the case, They're prosecutors and they investigate, but we've given them the strongest evidence we can. And they're going to take time. It's not a quick process.
Yes, having said that, could you elaborate on how the International Criminal Court interacts with the institutions such as the police, the army? How does the International Criminal Court interact with the police department and other security organizations when it comes to abductions and other disruptions aimed at dissenting voices? Can the entire department be held accountable at the ICC, or they have to deal with the individuals personally?
Well, what happens is individuals are charged by the ICC. The ICC is a court that deals with people. The International Court of Justice deals with countries, but the ICC brings charges against people. So they can bring charges against General Museveni, his son, Mr. Ananga, other people who have participated in running torture centers, and they can bring charges against individual officers or soldiers who have done these things. And when they come to a country, they set up an office, and all of the governmental offices must cooperate because there's a treaty. And Uganda has signed the treaty of the court. And when the court comes to Uganda, Uganda's government must cooperate. So what the court will do, JB, is it will come in and will interview those witnesses we have. And then it may decide to interview police and government officials. But normally a government is required to cooperate with the ICC because it's a treaty and that's the law.
Actually, ever since His Excellency Bobi Wine and his team managed to drag Museveni and his son, of course, and those others you mentioned, there has been some bit of an atmosphere, that gripped Museveni's camp. They are not settled. And actually, that's why His Excellency Bobi Wine managed to embark on a national tour, opening up offices in different parts of the country, of course, under the National Unity Platform. But of course, after the first phase, as if we are witnessing a change of winds, whereby police is now trying to come up with statements seemingly blocking him from continuing with the tour. Are you aware of this, and what does this speak to you?
It's interesting, JB. The government came up with that only on the last day of the tour. So once the tour, the government said, oh, we're stopping it. But they were afraid to stop it beforehand. So they only say we're going to stop it after it ended. They were afraid while it was going on to stop it. Now, you all saw those huge crowds, 20,000 at minimum, sometimes 50 or 100,000 people. Entire towns were filled with people, stadiums. The government no longer will dare to use violence against those people. Because if they kill people, if they gun them down, if they're beating them in front of cameras, then the ICC will indict. And so the government is now understanding it can no longer use raw, naked violence against these people who come to hear Bobi Wine. And the government knows that. And that's why they announced they're stopping the tour only on the last day, after it's all over. So they're trying now to come up with excuses why not to let Bobi go again on tour. But they're making up stories that are very weak. They're saying, well, towns were crowded, stores had to close. There was traffic accidents. These aren't the statements of a government that thinks it's all powerful anymore. These are the statements of a government looking to make excuses. So it remains to be seen whether they're going to be able to stop a future tour. What are they going to do when these tens of thousands of people come out to see Bobi? They can't gun them down, and the soldiers won't do that anymore. They can't beat them up with sticks in front of cameras because then they'll be indicted. So now the government is in a tough position. It can't really block these protests. If it does, the officials in the government get indicted. So they're damned if they do and they're damned if they don't. This is the force of law. Law, even the threat of law, makes governments behave better.
The way you are putting it out, it's like your cameras and lenses are still squarely focused on Museveni. Isn't the 215 evidence enough? You seem like you need more evidence in order to, back up the case. Is it the case?
Well, I think that we have enough evidence to make the International Criminal Court say there is a case here to investigate. Remember, our job at this early stage in the case is only to show the court there's enough here that the court should come in and investigate. Then the court will do its own inquiry. So our job is only to give the court a taste of what's out there, to show the court that there's enough that has happened, enough torture, enough brutalization that the court should launch the investigation. I think we've shown enough for that. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I think we've done more than most cases do when they first come to the ICC. But remember, JB, it takes the court time. All judicial processes take time. And the court's going to take many months to go over this evidence. But in that time, the government now has to behave itself. Because if it uses violence and torture in public, at least, and guns people down or beats them in protests, then the court is absolutely going to act. So the government now has to be on its best behavior. Now we're seeing the results. People are no longer afraid to come out. Look at all those huge crowds that were no longer scared. They were no longer afraid of General Museveni. This tells us what the rule of law can do. And I think people in the government also, in the NRM, are starting to understand that all of this violence has to come to an end, that this way of running Uganda is old and has to change. And so I think we've made a lot of progress. Those huge rallies are a sign of that.
Having talked about the 215 that they are enough to make the case, the last time we were here, actually after the show, very many Ugandans were actually in need to know how safe is this evidence, these affidavits at the ICC.
JB, let me say this. The International Criminal Court takes very seriously the need to keep things confidential and to keep them secret. When someone signs an affidavit to the court, that does not ever get disclosed by the court. And in any communications, the court uses a code to deal with these affidavits. When a person signs a statement to the International Criminal Court, that statement is secret, it is confidential. The one guiding principle that the court has is absolute privacy. People are free to communicate to the court, and it will never disclose that information to the government of Uganda. That is an absolute. And everything you send to the court is safe. And let me tell you this, if people send statements to us, to the NUP, to me directly in America through the email, those statements are also safe. We will safeguard those, and when we send them to the ICC, they are kept secret, and there's only a code used publicly. No name and no location and no house is ever disclosed publicly. So JB, I will say to the people of Uganda, the ICC is a safe place. And if you have something to tell them or tell us, you should feel free to send it. And I can even give my email address if you'd like, for people to send to if you'd like me to.
Actually, I wanted to ask you that if there is an official platform, because I believe very many concerned Ugandans would love to submit in more evidence. Please, you can go ahead and read it out. I'll also type it down in the comment section so that they can copy it and share it among themselves.
Okay, well, you can always write to the NUP and go to any NUP office or NUP person. You could also write to me at bruceafran@icloud.com. And that's my name, BRUCEAFRAN @icloud.com. And if you have a story of torture and abuse, we want to know. And we will then make sure that the right people come to you, and we put that together in a witness statement. So that's one address people could use. They could write to me at bruceafran@icloud.com, and we will forward that to the team. And we have a confidential system, and we have people outside of Uganda who can put together the documents. So it is a very safe system.
Thank you very much for that, because very many people were asking me about that. And I'm asking this on behalf of human rights defenders, activists, organizations, non-government organizations, and all that. What is the process of initiating a case at ICC? What does one need to go through, the steps, and maybe if you can expound more on the type of evidence and how to file it? I believe there are concerned Ugandans who would love also to drag the same people or other individuals to the International Criminal Court, because the courts back home, of course, you know the story.
Yes. Well, JB, that's the first test. Can the courts back home handle these cases? If the answer to that is no, then the ICC can step in. So that's the first step we use to show the court. We show the court that there is no real due process anymore in Uganda because the government controls the courts and threatens the judges. Now, in the ordinary case in Uganda, sure, the courts work, hopefully. But in a political case of torture, they don't work because the judges are often too afraid. And so what happens is people are charged, the judges want to release them and sometimes do, but then they're immediately put into the military courts. So they never get out. They can stay in for a year or two at a time, never get a court date. We've shown all this to the ICC. And this is the first step, showing the ICC that the Uganda courts can't work, that there's no due process in Uganda for those who are arrested and abused and tortured or charged with political offenses. That's number one. The next step we have to do is show the court that things such as torture, humiliation, degradation, abusive conduct are taking place. Because those are the things the court looks at. It doesn't look at ordinary crime. You know, if two people get in a fight, even over politics, and one hits the other and injures them, the ICC doesn't get into that. What the ICC looks at is violations of human rights law, of the law of nations. Do we torture people and degrade them? Do we put them through pain and suffering in a prison or in a court? Do people get beaten because of their ethnicity or their politics or their religion? Do people get killed without ever even reaching a courtroom? Do women get abused? We had one person who wrote about how her uterus was destroyed by the abuse of the police, and who literally grabbed her by her private parts when she was pregnant. She lost her baby and her uterus was lost. This is an example of degrading and humiliating treatment. People have been electrocuted in prison when they urinate. People are constantly whipped with wires. They're forced to dance 12, 20 hours in a row and are beaten if they fall down. All of this is forms of abuse. People have had flesh pulled out, fingers pulled out. All of this falls under the ICC. So we need to show them not only do the courts not work, but that these tortures are occurring. And once we've done that, we've done the basic job. But you have to have the evidence, and you have to be able to truly put it together in witness statements so the ICC can see it. And it's not enough to just say, and I don't mean to diminish anybody, to say I was arrested and raped. We have to have a description of when this occurred, what organization took them into custody, describe the details of what happened. It's not enough to say I was tortured. We need to know, how were you tortured? Did you have flesh pulled out? Did you have chemicals put in your eyes? You know, were you forced to breathe gases? Were you forced to dance for 12 hours at a time? Were you whipped? We need to know exactly what happened. That's what the court needs. It needs this detail. And that's what we need people to tell us. So go to your NUP person, send an email, as I've said, and we can at least start that and send more information to the court. The more we send to the court, the greater the chance they'll take the case.
Oh, you expounded it very well. Bruce, you well know that it's no longer news that Museveni is a dictator who actually captured power in 1986, and up to date, he's still clinging on to power, of course, ruling Ugandans at gunpoint. But this gentleman still enjoys recognition on the international stage. He still moves around Russia and all those other countries. What more can Ugandans do to prevent him from enjoying that space? Is there any strategies that you can give out to concerned citizens on that matter?
Yes, I can, JB. First, I want to say this. Museveni's ability to move around is very limited. He can go to Russia with very little rule of law. He could go to China where there's no rule of law. He might go to Iran, which is a dictatorship, but he can't go to any democratic countries. He might go next door to Kenya, but that's about it. He's not welcome in democratic countries. All he can do is travel to dictatorships. So he doesn't really have that much freedom. He may make a big deal of going to Russia, but Russia itself is under indictment, or Putin was, by the ICC. It's not a legitimate place anymore in the world. So Museveni's ability to be in the world is very limited. He has lost all of that international respect he once had. You know, there was a meeting of African leaders. He got exactly 10 seconds in a picture with Biden. That's all he'll ever get. That's all he'll ever get. Remember, this is the same man who was in the White House with President Reagan. Today, Museveni will never get anything more than a 5-second photo. And so his ability to move in the world is limited, and the respect is held and is very low. Only fellow dictators will welcome him. And that's the limits of what he's had. So that's the first thing, to say he doesn't really have that respect anymore. What Ugandans can do, first of all, never ever tolerate losing your rights. Don't tolerate not being able to protest. Organize those meetings like the NUP did. Other groups can do that too. The major thing young people must do in Uganda is register to vote. This is really very important. We've seen those big rallies with 100,000 people. We have to make sure those people are going to vote, because there may be huge crowds supporting Bobi Wine and the opposition. But if those people don't vote, if they say, I'm not a voter, well, then they can't get heard. Yes, it's true the government sometimes alters the votes. But if everyone who supports the NUP and the opposition votes, they're not going to be able to change that election. But what happens is people hurt themselves, JB, when they won't register to vote. They've got to sign up to vote. And when that election comes, they have to vote. And never stay home. You've got to vote. The government can forge some votes, but they can't forge 4 million. So if people sign up to vote and commit to voting, that's critical. And I saw an article recently, I think it was in the Daily Monitor, actually, that said just this, that young people in Uganda have to do more than protest. They got to vote when the time comes. So two things. You've got to hold those public meetings. You've got to speak out. You've got to register to vote. And other things can be done. For example, there's nothing stopping Ugandans from having a protest meeting in front of the State House.
In front of State House?
In front of State House. Do you think Museveni is going to gun people down now that the ICC is looking at him? No. People have to have the courage to do these things. And then the government is seen to be powerless. It's important for people to take their rights and use them. This government is no longer able to shoot people down and beat them up in the streets. If that happens in front of cameras, in front of videos, the government is in serious trouble. People need to have the courage to organize and do that. People can have a national moment of silence for the torture victims, in which the whole country stands still at 11 o'clock in the morning and for a full minute protests the torture victims. All of these things together will undermine the government and make the opposition stronger. So these things need to be done by people.
Thank you for that. Again, on the same issue, I want you to expound more on other strategies on the international scale, apart from pursuing the legal process of, dragging Museveni to ICC and all that kind of thing. Which other strategies on the international scale concern the Ugandans in the diaspora across the entire planet? Which other strategies can they employ in order to speed up this process of creating a non-fictional socio-economic and political change in Uganda?
Well, first of all, it's to support the opposition leaders when they come abroad to speak to people. It's very important to give that support. Also, the NUP and the other opposition parties all need funds. So people outside Uganda need to contribute, because without money, these protest rallies can't happen. Without money, traveling the country is not possible. So people outside Uganda who are earning good livings should be contributing if they believe in this cause. They have to contribute money to the political parties. That's very important. Also, in the countries people live in, they should be meeting with members of parliament in their own countries where they're living outside of Uganda. They should meet with members of the cabinet in those countries and start to talk about how change is needed, how their own families have been arrested or tortured, and make the people who run these other governments, members of parliament in the Netherlands, in France, in America, understand the problem. They have to start lobbying the countries they live in to stop supporting Museveni's government. So those are some things right there. Also, people can take these things to the UN. There's a UN Human Rights Commission. People outside of Uganda can get a lawyer, can get a human rights lawyer, and bring complaints to the UN Human Rights Commission. All of these things together make a huge difference. They begin to weaken the willingness of people to support a dictator. And that weakness is really gone now. You saw all those rallies. The people of Uganda are ready for that change. People outside the country need to contribute money. They also need to work outside the country to talk to people in the other governments. And use the UN. Use the UN to make those filings. Go to the Human Rights Commission. Get lawyers outside of Uganda to do that. All of this makes a difference. And I hope that's helpful. It really is important for people to activate outside the country.
On the same note, what's your take on some Western countries that still shake Museveni's blood-stained hands? Because many Ugandans, and actually on my side this is evident, Western countries have financed Museveni. They have empowered his financial muscle, and that's why actually he can get money to pay for the too much kind of administration that he runs in Uganda, paying the soldiers. Of course, he pays them peanuts. Paying the MPs, doing all, buying vehicles, those machines, guns, bombs, and all that kind of thing. They support him, they finance him. And before we wind up, what is your take on that? And which kind of message would you give to Ugandans in the diaspora?
I would say Ugandans in the diaspora must protest those governments. They must go to their congressmen in the US and say, this has to stop. My relative was arrested and brutalized. My relative was killed. I was tortured. You need to talk in Congress and stop this financing of a dictator. People in the diaspora must talk to those governments. And every government that's a democracy has members of parliament who will talk to ordinary people. If you live in the Netherlands, your member of parliament will talk to you. If you live in the US, your member of Congress will talk to you. If you live in Britain, your member of parliament will talk to you. Don't be afraid to do that. That's important. It's very important. But the biggest message I would give is this. Yes, it's true. Governments outside have supported Museveni because he sends soldiers to the Sudan and to Somalia, and he supports the U.S. doing that. And my country, the U.S., has given $1 billion a year. That is wrong. It's beginning to change. The World Bank cut off loans to Uganda. That's a big change. But the big message, JB, I give is this. Don't worry about what happens outside Uganda. Worry about what happens in Uganda. Use your rights to make sure this government is defeated. Use your rights to protest en masse all the time to keep that going. Because eventually the government's going to make a mistake and it's going to use violence and then it will be forced from power. But never worry about what people outside do. Outsiders cannot give you your freedom. Freedom for Uganda can be found only by Ugandans. My message is Ugandans are the key to freedom. Don't worry about the outside world. Use your rights in Uganda. The government can't stop a protest under the law. The government will no longer use violence. It can't risk it. Use your rights. That's the key to change. Keep using those rights every day. And don't worry about what happens outside the country. It's you in Uganda that need to make that change.
As we wind up, what final message or advice do you give to the entire Ugandan community? Or they should leave everything for ICC to, finish everything?
The ICC is not the answer to Ugandans' freedom. It may help. The answer to Ugandans' freedom is to speak your mind. Join those protests. Stand in the street and protest. Organize a protest. Register to vote. Join when the opposition has a rally. Never stop asserting your rights, because that is what will make the change. Many dictatorships have fallen. Gabon, for example's dictatorship was removed. In Gambia, the dictatorship was gone. South Africa, apartheid fell. Museveni's regime will go out of power if people in Uganda assert their rights and make it clear they're no longer going to tolerate this. Ugandans also have to talk to each other. Older Ugandans are the source of Museveni's votes. Younger people in Uganda must talk to their parents, to their aunts and uncles, to their grandparents and say, why do you vote for him? Why do you vote for a dictator after 40 years? You must speak to each other in Uganda. And that's the key. Ugandans are the key to freedom. Not the ICC, not America. Ugandans in Uganda are the key to freedom.
Thank you for your time, Bruce. Till next time. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you always, JP.
Bruce Afran munamateeka wa Kyagulanyi Ssentamu Robert Bobi Wine People Power okusinziira wali mu ggwanga la America mu kkooti y'ensi yonna ICC. Ono yatwalayo omusango gumulaba mwenna ogufudde Mwami Museveni powerless olwaleero ogw'abantu abatulugunyizibwa ogw'abantu abatusibwako ebikolobero era obujulizi obw'eddala 2015 be yawaayo mu kkooti y'ensi yonna era naawe Kyagulanyi amagezi nti nga kkooti bwekkiriza omusango gwaffe atandika ogenda otalaga eggwanga Uganda ogende buli kanyomero Mwami Museveni twagala yongera akola ensobi nti Mwami Museveni alina options bbiri zokka either okubaleka ne mukola bimwagala okukola ne mubimaliriza mirembe ne mmalanga muyingidde State House bannansi ne beddiza obuyinza bwabwe oba Mwami Museveni okuba stoppinga n'abakuba mu tear gas n'abakuba emigo n'akuba amasasi n'akola ebikolobero ICC nefuna obujulizi bungi NATO neeyingirawo Museveni abeera forced out of power. Nti zonna options zetulina ziri bbiri naye zonna zifulumya Mwami Museveni mu ntebe bw'abaleka ne Okwekalakasa mirembe afuluma bw'abagezaako bateekako eryanyi okubalemesa Okwekalakasa era afuluma entebe n'olwekyo ali mu kuggumiza nti ffe bannayuganda ewaka ffe tulina okutaasa ensi yaffe twongere okulaga eddembe lyaffe nga bannansi bwe baavuddeyo mu bungi bwe batyo okwaniriza President Kyagulanyi Ssentamu Robert Bobi Wine ebitundu gy'abadde agendamu naffe tukifuula ekyalutentezi buli kadde tubeere nga tuvaayo okulaga obutali bumativu bwaffe obutali bwenkanya obuli mu gavumenti ya General Kaguta Museveni nti in the long run bwe tunaagiyongera okuvaayo tugenda kumukozesa ensobi abeere forced out of power oba ayagala oba tayagala n'atugamba nti bannakyemalira bonna amawanga gye babadde bagudde era badduse mu nsi ezo bannansi beddiza obuyinza nti kati General Museveni kumpi aliwo basigaddewo batono nnyo badikiteeta mu Africa era nga nabo ssaawa yaabwe etuuse General Museveni munatera okumulaba ng'agwa kuba wano waatuuse ali ku tipping point just tip katini nnyo ng'agwera ennume y'ekigongo enkona mugisimyeyo nayo nsululu mu ttaka nga bannayuganda beddiza ensi yaabwe kyonna kiri erife bannayuganda agambye kkooti y'ensi yonna egenda tuyamba naye nga ffe tulina okusooka okweyamba ffe tulina okusooka okulinnyawo eggere ne tugamba nti ekiba kibe twagala nsi yaffe ekyo kijja okwanguza kkooti y'ensi yonna okusinziira ku bikolobero General Museveni by'anaaba akola bannansi abatalina musango n'agamba n'ekirala buli munnayuganda yonna gy'oli buli ggwanga ly'olimu buli nsi gy'olimu fuba okulaba ng'opetisoninga aba Parliament abakulembeze mu nsi eyo ng'obapetisoninga ng'obalaga ebikyamu ebikolebwa mu Uganda General Kaguta Museveni timwongere okumuvunza mu mawanga gonna mu UN buli wamu muloopeyo emisango mukole mutya ensi eyongera okumwenyuwa nga takyabuleko gyadda abuleko waabeera abeere nga takyefiiringa awulire ng'ensi agikooye paka lwanaaba forced okulikulira oba bwanaaba forced okudduka mu Uganda entatinta bannayuganda beddiza ensi yaabwe kati nno tulina okumanya ekituufu ekyokukola era tukikole ku lw'ensi yaffe ate ng'ekyo kyennyini kye tulina okukola Uganda etereere naffe tugyeyagaliremu tweyanziza Bruce Aflan munnamateeka wa Kyagulanyi Ssentamu Robert Bobi Wine okuva mu ggwanga lya America era kati awo tuzzeemuko ku maanyi atutegedde tulina kugenda mu maaso nakwekalakasa tewali kutuula tewali kubivaako tewali kubireka tulina kwongera kugenda mu nkuŋŋaana tulina okwongera okuggyamu akatengo ng'abantu bekabavuddemu mu kugenda mu nkuŋŋaana za Kyagulanyi nera kwongere katuviiremu ddala twongere ddala kugenda nga tuzeetabamu enkuŋŋaana ezo okwongera okunafuya Mwami Museveni omumufuula disabled kuba kyo kyawedde kati ali disabled Loya agambye nti kati Mwami Museveni just ageza kufuna bye yeekwasa obutalaga nti yenjebuse okukulira ng'ateekawo bibbomu ateekawo simanya biki okulaga nti akyalina mwakaalimu akanyinyinya akakyalimu naye nga temuli nti essaawa yonna kigenda kwabika essaawa yonna kigenda kwedomola Mwami Museveni atumire abeere nga atulabyeko nnyo olwo ate bannayuganda beddiza ensi yaabwe olwo Uganda etunyumire tandika okulaba abo bonna abakoze ebikolwa ku bannansi bonna bakangavvule abo bonna abadde bakuba ettaka bonna emisango batwalibwe mu makooti abo bonna ababbibwako ebyabwe bibaddizibwe abo bonna abayise mu kutulugunyizibwa bonna bafune ku ssanyu eddungi bafune ku ssanyu ppya nga Uganda efunye ku mukulembeze omundi omukulembeze omulala Kyagulanyi Ssentamu Robert Bobi Wine. Munamateeka agambye nti n'abeene kasuna kugiweeza tulina okuba nga tugendayo buli kadde ne mu banka ensi yonna nga twongera okugendayo kwongera okubategeeza nti tewali kuba Museveni ssente nti kubanga tuyinza okuba nga mubivuddeko awo musiriseemu ate ne baddamu ne bazzaawo looni z'okumpa Museveni ate struggle gye twali tuliko ng'egenze mu maaso ate neddamu nezingama olwa Museveni okuweebwa ssente tulina kwongera kupushinga push till tunalaba nga General Museveni ate gavumenti yeegudde. Mbaagala nnyo mwenna abaliko mwe bali kubaako Mukama ansaba bankuumire tujja kuba tuddamu okugamba ebigambo mweraba.